Hello and welcome. In this show, we're going to be taking a look at the Aeropress and actually making the original recipe. So I've done an introduction video on the Aeropress, and in that video I showed my standard recipe. I've linked to that below, or you can go to the beginning of the playlist that this video is in. In this one, I want to do the original recipe that came with the Aeropress, the recommended by Alan Adler, creator of the Aeropress recipe, and just see what that's like. So I'm going to dive into it and then talk about what I think the benefits and such are. So I'm actually not going to be using a scale with this. The original recipe is very simple. You also don't need to rinse the filter either. So first things first, filter in, and then 1 scoop. And the idea is we're going to be using the numbers on the side here. So 1 scoop and then filling up to 1. You could also do 2 scoops and fill to 2, 3 scoops and fill to 3, 4 scoops, 4, etc. Hopefully I've ground enough coffee. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, 1 scoop in. And this is finely ground coffee. So I could go finer with this. I was kind of guessing a little bit because my grinder actually really does actually do espresso. So I think if you have like a Brazza Encore or any kind of entry-level burr grinder, just go like fine with it. You can go as fine as you can and see what the result is like. And then what I'm going to do is add water just to covering the 1, essentially, just to the kind of the top of the circle of the 1. And then I'm going to stir for 10 seconds and then press. I'm just going to kind of guess the 10 seconds. Also, it's indicated that, or suggested that the water should be 80 to 85 degrees Celsius, and that's 85 is 185 degrees Fahrenheit. That's kind of what I'm targeting for this. I've got a lighter roasted natural Ethiopian, so I think the higher range of that temperature is going to be good for that. And then once this is done, it makes a concentrate, and I'm going to pour water in to fill the cup. So I don't actually have an electric kettle, which makes it much easier to get the exact temperature, but I do have a thermometer on the top of this kettle, which is really nice. So that makes things easy, and it looks like we're about there, so let's get to pouring. All right, so filling up to the 1 and then stirring. All right, oh, that's a little tricky because of the bloom. That looks good. Okay, now stirring, being careful not to muck up the filter. All right, I think that's about 10 seconds. Now let's press. And just like I did in the first video, I'm just gonna use I'm just gonna kind of lean on this a little bit. I'm not really like pushing too hard. And I'm actually going to push through this swishing sound a little bit. All the way to the bottom. Okay. That seems like the thing to do to me. And now we have a concentrate. I kind of want to taste it. I'm really curious. It is definitely interesting. It's smooth, definitely concentrated. I'm going to fill it up to about here. I think that's about 8 ounces. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to make. I have a suspicion that I might not have been fine enough in my grind, but let's see what we got. It's quite hot. I'm gonna let that sit for a moment. So while that's cooling down, a couple points came to my mind as I was brewing. The whishing sound at the bottom. So I usually stop when it starts to hiss. That means most of the water has been pushed out. And anything else that I could press out is probably not going to be adding much to the coffee, so I might as well stop then. And then, of course, is the variable that's always there with the Aeropress, which is how much pressure do you use. I haven't played around with comparing like high pressure and low pressure, or like the time of pressing to see what kind of effect that has. That might be a fun experiment for the future. Obviously, you can use extremely high pressure and simulate an espresso, and you can see that in I'll link to that video below, like I mentioned before. One of the benefits to doing this method that I just demonstrated, this is just the original recipe method, is that you can create multiple cups with 1 brew. Using my original base recipe means that each brew is like a cup of coffee, and if you're making coffee for a lot of people, it can kind of take a while, but you can create essentially 4 cups of coffee with 1 Aeropress brew, in which case you would use 4 of those scoops, fill up to the 4 and press, and you'd have a concentrate, and then you would want to dilute accordingly. I think that in order to really get this method down, you're going to want to practice that, probably especially be a little difficult if you're constantly changing coffees, because the amount of dilution that you want and the grind size and everything are going to change. But if you're using the same coffee a lot and you have that method down, I think this could be pretty good. Knowing how much to dilute is a little bit tricky. You can, of course, just get into measuring all of this. The amount of coffee that's in one scoop is obviously going to change depending on the coffee itself. Like what the coffee is and how it's roasted is going to change how much is actually in a scoop. So I decided not to weigh here because that's not really what the original recipe is about. It's about like just brewing with what you have here. You don't need a fancy kettle either. As you can see, you can just pour into the top, and there is no need for delicate and precise pouring with the Aeropress. It's just about getting the water in there. So we've made a good cup of coffee. I have some initial impressions. I'm a little skeptical about the temperature. I'm thinking I probably need to use more pressure because I am missing out on a brighter fruitiness in this coffee that I really like. And my initial thought is I need higher temperature for that, but I might be able to compensate with a greater amount of pressure during the brew process. This also feels a little too diluted, and perhaps all of this could be fixed simply by grinding finer. So that might be how I would adjust this brew for this brew method, is try out a finer grind and see how that goes. But even given that, this is a nice smooth cup of coffee, quite enjoyable. So that is the original Aeropress recipe. Again, it's essentially 1 scoop of coffee in, filling up to the number associated with the scoops. So if you put 1 scoop in, you fill up to the 1. If you put 2 scoops in, you fill up to the 2, etc. Stir for 10 seconds. Careful not to scrape the filter, and then press, and you have a concentrate, which you can then dilute. The concentrate was definitely a little too concentrated to enjoy on its own, but this is a good coffee. If you have any questions about the Aeropress, brewing on the Aeropress, please feel free to leave your questions, your comments below. And of course, check out the first video in the series and then subsequent videos where I'm gonna go over different unique Aeropress brewing methods. I'm going to start with some championship recipes and then just get into any other ones that I find along the way. And it should be fun exploring what's possible with the Aeropress. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.